Thank you so much, Beth, for taking the time to talk with me and the rest of the world about teacher education and where you think the field has been and where it's going. You have contributed so much to the field, particularly in pushing the field to think hard about teachers noticing, pre-service teachers noticing, and a bit more recently, the intersection of noticing and equity, among a bunch of other things like the use of classroom video, the design of video clubs, and so on and so on. I mean, I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on where the field of teacher preparation is. So just first question, how long have you been in the world of teacher preparation?
So first, Carlos, I want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I always enjoy talking with you about this kind of work. So I've been involved in teacher preparation, I would say starting in graduate school, so for about 20 years. During that time, I had conducted a first study with my advisor, Miriam Sharon, where we were looking at the ways that using video and a particular video analysis tool, similar to these kinds of tools that are out there now for coding and analyzing video. We had mocked something up and we had teachers using it to think about how we could support their noticing. And so that was back in the early 2000s. So for about 20 years, I've been in this work.
Mm. So back when you were doing this work with Dr. Sharon, what did the field of teacher preparation look like then compared to what it looks like now?
So, I mean, I think that's a good question. I was sort of less immersed in the field broadly of teacher preparation at that time. I think what I would say, I was really trying to understand the sort of construct of teacher noticing and how we could help teachers, and beginning and future teachers get sort of refine the ways that they look at and make sense of classrooms. I mean, I think that emerged because we were really understanding from prior work the complex work of teaching, that teaching is a highly cognitively demanding task. And I think that the field had, because of the research on cognition broadly, in the 15 years prior to that, we were, the field was really recognizing how complex the work of teaching is. So, for example, at that time, a big body of work was emerging on teachers' knowledge. And this was an outgrowth of Lee Shulman's important work on the teacher's pedagogical content knowledge. So there was a lot of research trying to understand the nature of teachers' pedagogical content knowledge across different domains. What kind of knowledge do teachers need? How do we support them in developing it? And I would say one of the things that Miriam and I were working on was, and I don't even think we knew it quite at the time, or at least I didn't know it quite at the time, was that this idea of noticing was bringing forth a fundamentally new construct to understand the complex work of teaching. So prior to the teacher knowledge work was a lot of work on teachers' beliefs that came out of kind of the 70s and 80s, and that work is still important. Then there was a big body of work launched by Lee Shulman and many others, Pam Grossman, Deborah Ball, Hilda Borko, and others, who really were trying to understand what was the nature of teacher knowledge across domains. And then Miriam and I, along with some others in the field, John Mason and others, put forth this idea of teacher noticing. And Fred Erickson, of course, his work was really critical to this, which is really trying to understand in the moment of teaching how teachers are sort of reading and making sense of classroom interactions, and notably the work of Vicki Jacobs and Randy Phillip and others trying to link that to teachers' decision making.
I mean, you have so much expertise around talking about teachers noticing and like really situating it historically within where the work of understanding teacher cognition and teachers' knowledge, situating it within that sort of world. I'm curious, as a practitioner of teacher education and as someone who has really been steeped in the world of teacher noticing, like what does that look like for novice teachers, and what is the development of some of these constructs, particularly noticing as the construct that you've been really engaged with? What does the development look like for novice teachers, and what is the experience like seeing them?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I think one of the ways I think about that is that, and I think some of Pam Grossman and Morva McDonald, brought this to the field's attention, was the need for a common language in the work of teaching and teacher preparation. And I think that in my work with teacher preparation, what I've tried to do is to think about when we're thinking about the work of teacher noticing, what is the sort of shared framework around which we're trying to apprentice new teachers. Now, as I've been working in the field longer, and as I've expanded my own understandings of the complexities of teacher preparation and education much more broadly, I think we can see some of the challenges and problems that are inherent in developing a shared vision for teacher preparation. And I think about that in a very systemic sort of way. There are multiple players who are involved in teacher preparation. You have the university faculty and supervisors. You have the mentor classroom teachers. You also have the teacher candidates who come with their own ideas and understandings of teaching and learning, which we all know this, but I also think it's always worth repeating that unlike almost any other profession, teaching is the profession that we enter into it having lived through classrooms, and therefore we think we know how to do it best because we've been living through it. And something that I've become more aware of and mindful of and now working on is what does that mean for the ways that we prepare novice teachers to notice classrooms. So specifically, about 10 years ago, I conducted a study where we were looking at mathematics teachers noticing pre-service teachers, and can we support them in developing a more ambitious vision of mathematics teaching and learning. And we structured that around a variety of different dimensions that were really being advocated in reform documents. And I would say that if I could go back and do that work, I wish I had more people on my team and my own blind spots to not sort of understand how those frameworks are charged with sort of different communities have defined what should go in those frameworks. And I don't think those frameworks are inclusive of all perspectives. And I think they then serve to minoritize different groups of learners. One of the things I've been really glad for in the last 5 to 7 years has been a collaboration with Dr. Vicki Hand, who's at CU Boulder. I've become more intimately familiar with the work of Thomas Phillip, who plays a very important role in teacher education, to really begin to understand how our histories and ideologies, both as teachers but also those of learners, how those are coming into play in our teacher noticing. So I think it's as much about learning to notice and attend to the complexities of student thinking and the complexities of classroom discourse, but also situating the curriculum, the kinds of tasks learners are doing, the learners who are in those settings, the teachers who are in those settings, as all being embedded within a system that has privileged some sorts of dimensions of teaching and learning over others. And I think now the field needs to begin to interrogate those.
How far do you think the field has come in sort of thinking about and bringing this historicized perspective on teachers noticing of classroom interactions?
Well, I mean, I would say that in the last 5 years, I think there's been a fundamental shift by a much broader community, and probably farther back than that. And I'm not as familiar with their work. But what I think maybe teacher education suffers from is how we can get people in conversation with each other. So I think this work has been going on for a while, but I think more recently you see an integration of different kinds of work coming together. I'll give an example. I think Deborah Ball and her colleagues have done a tremendous job. And I by calling out a person's name, I feel like I'm neglecting people, but Deborah Ball, Maggie Lampert, Megan Franke, Elham Kazemi, and a whole host of colleagues, Hala Gassini, who have been really working on understanding the core practices of teaching. And I think that practice turn was an important one and has helped us really understand how we can develop a shared approach to thinking about teacher preparation. I was also, during that time, I think something that has also happened was a large body of work by folks like Thomas Phillip, Lonnie Horn, and others who have been really challenging the institutional systems of teacher preparation and the sociopolitical systems in which teacher education resides. Now I think those are coming together, and I'm going to call out the work of two young scholars who I think are really pushing the field in what I think are really important ways by bringing these sort of different paradigms and perspectives together. Sarah Kavanaugh and Abby Reisman, who are very much rooted in their disciplines, so similar to Deborah Ball and colleagues, very much rooted in the disciplines of teacher preparation in literacy, mathematics, social science and history, Hosan Kang in science education. And they're also bringing a social justice perspective to that work. And I think that that is a promising way forward, is to think about how we can bring these lines of work together so that we can be thinking about the preparation of teachers for the work they need to walk in and enter doing when they begin teaching, while also really framing all of that work from a social justice lens.
I think this convergence of perspectives is where you think the field of teacher education is going broadly, or how else would you characterize sort of the direction that teacher education is going right now and the path it's on?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm hopeful, Carlos. I'm hopeful, but I also think we have to really think about whose voices are represented at the table in those conversations, who are partners in that work. I think that some of the group, the Teach Math group, Julia Aguirre, there's a whole long list of them, Mary Foote, Corey Drake, and others, Aaron Turner, I know is part of that work. That team, I think, has brought together a group that represents a different set of perspectives to bring different voices to the table. I think we need to really think carefully about that, because who the researchers are really matters for how this work is going to unfold. So yes, I'm hopeful. And I also think there's more work to be done, both in having representation of minoritized scholars who are engaging in this work together to move the field forward. Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen in order for the aspiration towards having a more diverse group of scholars sort of as part of the conversation, and what do you think needs to happen in teacher education broadly, given all that you've talked about to this point about where teacher education has been, what path it's on now? Where do you think teacher education needs to go?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. Part of what I was also thinking about too is that you asked in the previous question if that was sort of broadly what was happening in teacher preparation. And I didn't answer that, but I want to answer it because I think it is important. I think, yes, that's partly where the field is going, but I also think there's another part of the field that is very much about trying to understand measurement and how we measure effective teacher preparation. And I have a lot of concerns about that, because I think there are a lot of assumptions about what it means to prepare teachers, and how we think about that sort of like, are they well prepared in the context in which they've been prepared to then when they go teach. And there's a lot to like think about that alignment that I don't think we know a lot about. And so I think the measurement movement, while I think is somewhat important from a research perspective, I think we have to better conceptualize and broaden how we understand measurement. I'll take the EdTPA, for example. When I first started at University of California, Irvine, the EdTPA went by another name. It was co-developed by a collection of practitioners and researchers from Stanford, the UC system, and a handful of Cal States, I believe. And it really was intended as a formative assessment. It was intended to be a way that you could sort of get information, give beginning to teachers feedback, and let them engage in cycles of reflection for improvement. We know that that actually fundamentally matters. Like if teachers can like really engage in sort of these rigorous cycles of improvement, and like all practitioners, we get better. What happened with the EdTPA is that it got usurped, I think, by the accountability movement. And therefore, it now functions more as a measure of beginning teachers rather than a feedback opportunity to improve teaching. So, I want to address that, because when we're talking about where's the field going, I think we have to recognize there's kind of these two things that I think have been going on in the field.
With the EdTPA being an instantiation of that, about better conceptualizing measurement in teacher preparation, what sort of ways might you conceptualize teacher education measurement, and what would that look like, and how would people engage with measurement like that, and what would be different than the way we currently think about measurement in teacher preparation?
I mean, I think these sort of mini cycles of studying practice are really important. I think that that's a useful way to think about how people get better at doing their work. And I know you and I both ascribe to this notion of getting better at getting better, right? So I think the EdTPA, for example, has a model underneath it that could potentially be one, that could be followed for looking at practice and studying practice. Um, I think the important part is through those cycles that teacher candidates are learning practices and routines for how to investigate and interrogate practice. And so if I were to think of developing a measurement system, and I haven't thought about this, so you're kind of getting me, I mean, you and I have thought about this on some very particular goals, but I like the notion that our work with CTARN has been drawing on, which is to really try to think about how do we develop practical measures that could be useful for providing feedback to teacher educators and to teacher candidates that could allow them to have grounded conversations for the improvement of teaching. I mean, I think that's when I sort of sit in a lot of different contexts, Carlos, the thing that I find startling and challenging is how we think about not just collecting data, but how teacher educators and teachers use data. And I turn to the work of improvement science because I think they have a model that can be promising for how we could get teacher educators to think about data as something that could give them feedback for improvement. Now, I mean, I think one thing that needs to happen in teacher education is that teacher educators need to be provided time, space, and compensation for engaging in that work. I know, as in the UC system, for example, we have people who are members of teacher preparation who have incredibly full teaching loads, supervision loads, and they work tirelessly with the teacher candidates. To engage them in this kind of work is really challenging, and I think we need systems to recognize that this work is important and valuable for improving the teaching workforce. I just think one of the things I think back to Pam Grossman's work when she did the cross-professional study between teaching and looking at other sort of human-centered professions and how people are prepared. I think she unveiled some of the challenges that are in teacher preparation that these other professions don't suffer from quite in the same way. So, you're training to become a clinical therapist, for example, you have a very practice routine way of doing that kind of work. We haven't done that in teacher preparation. So her work and others has been really promising in bringing that. I guess what I would want to look at is like, how do we look at the preparation of other complex professions and think about what are all the different component parts of that? And do we even think about embedding those in teacher preparation? I don't know the answer to that, but I can guess that when I look at teacher preparation in California, we expect teachers to be able to do the job equivalent to an expert after 9 months of preparation. But when we look at other complex professions, such as, nursing, the practice of law, medical preparation, we would never expect anyone to go in and be able to do that work at the expert level within 9 months. So, I mean, I ask questions about that, like how are these systems being developed and why do we accept that those systems are the way that they are?
Well, thank you for all of that insight and sharing all of your expertise. But before I let you go, one last question. What is it that you know now as an experienced teacher educator that you wish you would have known when you began your career in teacher preparation?
Oh my goodness, there's a lot. I think I wish I had known more about the complexity of understanding schools and education as historical sociopolitical spaces and interrogated what that meant for preparing teachers to teach in a wide array of contexts. Because I think I've historically had a utopian view of education, and it's become more cynical over the last several years when I have come to appreciate through conversations with colleagues and my participation in various communities the harm that public education has caused for many. I still continue to believe education is a human right. I think a public education system is a social imperative. I think we need to really interrogate and think deeply about how we work in collaboration with local systems to do that work well so that our candidates are prepared to work in the schools that can disrupt inequities and better serve youth in our communities.
Well, thank you so much for all of your insight and expertise and where you think the field of teacher preparation has been and where it's going, and sharing a lot of your experiences with us. And I hope that people who are watching this get a lot out of it and get as much out of it as I did. So thank you so much, Beth, for doing this.
Thank you, Carlos.